What happens when the sitting Vice President of the United States sits down for what should be a routine late-night interview, only to stumble into the fiercest confrontation of his political career? What happens when polished talking points collide with questions that cut too deep to ignore? Tonight, we're unpacking the explosive clash between Vice President J.D. Vance and Stephen Colbert. A showdown that escalated so fast, it ended with security escorting the second most powerful man in America off the Late Show stage. This wasn't just another political interview gone off the rails. This was a masterclass in how quickly civility collapses when two strong personalities lock horns over the nation's most divisive issues. From the moment Vance walked on stage, the tension was obvious. Colbert, famous for his razor-sharp wit and ability to unnerve politicians, was clearly ready for battle. And while the vice president settled into the guest chair with the calm confidence of a man seasoned by countless interviews, Colbert's opening words carried an edge that signaled trouble ahead. "Mr. Vice President, thank you for being here." Colbert began with his trademark smile, a smile that longtime viewers knew was the calm before the storm. "It's refreshing to see someone in your position willing to have an honest conversation." Vance leaned back, posture crisp, voice steady. "Honest conversation is exactly what the American people deserve. That's why I'm here." Colbert didn't waste time. Good. Then let's start with something troubling a lot of Americans. Your administration makes bold claims about economic recovery. But when we look at the numbers, when we talk to real families struggling just to get by, there seems to be a disconnect between the rhetoric and reality. The vice president's jaw tightened. "Stephen, you're starting from a false premise. The facts show progress. Unemployment is down, manufacturing is coming back, and families are better off today than they were 2 years ago." Colbert leaned forward. "Are they, though? Because I have letters from viewers. Americans working 2 jobs, who still can't afford rent. Teachers buying supplies for their students out of their own pockets, while your administration talks about cutting education funding. How do you celebrate success when so many people are being left behind?" Vance tried to stay composed, his training showing. But there was a new strain in his voice. "Governing means making tough choices. We inherited a broken economy. Fixing it requires difficult decisions that don't always feel good in the moment." Colbert pounced. "Difficult decisions? Is that what you call slashing school lunch programs while approving tax breaks for corporations posting record profits? Those are the sacrifices, you mean?" The audience, usually primed for laughter, had fallen silent. This was no comedy bit. This was raw, uncomfortable. For the first time, Vance shifted uneasily. His polished mask cracked just slightly. "With all due respect, Stephen, you're oversimplifying complex policy. The American people elected us to make the hard choices other administrations wouldn't. Sometimes that means short-term sacrifice for long-term benefit." Colbert's voice sharpened. "Short-term sacrifice? Tell that to the single mother, in Ohio choosing between groceries and her daughter's asthma medicine. Tell that to the veteran in Pennsylvania waiting 8 months for benefits. When you say sacrifice, Mr. Vice President, who exactly is doing the sacrificing?" The question hung in the air, heavy, unflinching. Vance's knuckles whitened against the arm of his chair, his composure thinning. And when he finally spoke, his voice carried an edge that hadn't been there before. "Stephen, I think you're being deliberately obtuse," Vance said, his tone hardening. "Every administration has to make priority decisions about resource allocation. We're focused on policies that benefit all Americans. not just the politically convenient constituencies that happen to get the most media attention. Colbert's eyebrows shot up. Those who knew his style recognized it instantly. The vice president had just stepped into a trap. Politically convenient constituencies. Colbert repeated, his voice deceptively calm. Are we talking about children who need school lunches? Veterans who serve their country? Working families who can't afford health care? These are politically convenient constituencies? The audience was silent now. The laughter and applause, gone. They knew they were witnessing something much bigger than late-night banter. Vance realized he had misstepped, but instead of retreating, he doubled down. What I mean, Stephen, is that effective governance requires looking past emotional appeals and focusing on policies that create sustainable, long-term prosperity. Sometimes the media fixates on individual hardship stories instead of the broader picture, what's actually working for the majority of Americans. Colbert let that land. Then, slowly, deliberately, he repeated the words back to him. Individual hardship cases. Mr. Vice President, are you seriously sitting here describing struggling American families as individual hardship cases? The phrase hit the room like a gunshot. Vance knew instantly it was a catastrophic mistake, but the damage was already done. Individual hardship cases, Colbert repeated again, savoring the words like a predator circling prey. That's what you call American citizens fighting, to survive in the very economy you're here celebrating? Vance tried damage control, but his voice betrayed him. Defensive, brittle. You're taking my words out of context. Of course, every American matters, but as policymakers, we have to look at aggregate data, not just anecdotal situations. Anecdotal situations, Colbert cut in, pouncing. So we've gone from individual hardship cases to anecdotal situations. Do you even hear yourself? Right now? These aren't numbers on a spreadsheet. These are human beings. The silence in the studio was suffocating. This wasn't comedy anymore. It was a dismantling, live on national television. Vance's media polish was slipping. His talking points, reliable in friendly territory, were crumbling under relentless pressure. Stephen, I think you're manufacturing controversy where none exists. My record on supporting working families speaks for itself. Colbert's response was sharp, his anger no longer performative. Does it, though? Because your record shows votes against raising the minimum wage, against expanding health care coverage, and in favor of tax policies that overwhelmingly benefit the wealthy. So when you say your record speaks for itself, what exactly is it saying? Vance's jaw tightened, his shoulders tensed. When he finally answered, the polish was gone, replaced with raw irritation. You know what, Stephen? I came here in good faith to have a reasonable discussion. But it's clear you're more interested in scoring political points than actually talking about policy. Colbert leaned in, eyes locked, voice cold and precise. Good faith, Mr. Vice President. Good faith would mean acknowledging that your policies have real consequences for real people, rather than dismissing their struggles as anecdotal situations and individual hardship cases. Good faith would mean answering direct questions, not hiding behind talking points. I'm not hiding, Vance snapped, his voice rising for the first time. I'm trying to explain complex policy to someone more interested in playing gotcha journalism than in understanding the realities of governance. The phrase was gasoline on the fire. Gotcha journalism? Colbert's voice dropped low, steel-edged. Mr. Vice President, asking you how your policies help struggling families isn't gotcha journalism. It's accountability. It's what every elected official should expect when they sit in this chair. Vance was unraveling. The confident politician who walked on stage was gone, replaced by someone visibly rattled, defensive, cornered. "Stephen," he said tightly, "your viewers deserve better than this kind of partisan attack masquerading as journalism. That was the breaking point." "Partisan attack?" Colbert's tone turned to ice. "Mr. Vice President, all I've asked is how your policies help working families. And instead of answers, you've called struggling Americans individual hardship cases and anecdotal situations." The silence that followed was suffocating. The Vice President had walked in with authority, but now everyone in the room could see he was losing control. "You've accused me of gotcha journalism for asking basic questions about your record, and now you're calling it a partisan attack because I won't let you hide behind empty talking points." The studio was dead silent. Audience, crew, everyone sat frozen, watching what felt like a train wreck in slow motion. Vance's face was flushed now, his composure shattered. When he spoke again, it was with the kind of anger politicians usually bury deep. "You know what your problem is, Stephen?" he snapped. "You sit in your ivory tower making jokes about serious issues, while people like me are actually solving problems. You tear down everyone who doesn't fit your narrow world view. But you never offer real solutions yourself." Colbert rose slowly from his chair, deliberate, controlled. His voice, though, carried a fury that shook the studio. "My ivory tower. Mr. Vice President, my father died when I was 10 years old. I know what it means when every dollar matters. I know what struggling families go through. So don't you dare lecture me about ivory towers while you dismiss real pain as individual hardship cases." Vance shot to his feet, the thin veneer of civility gone. "And don't you lecture me about real people," he barked. "You've never had to make a decision that affects millions of lives. It's easy to criticize from the sidelines." "Then explain it," Colbert roared, his composure cracking for the first time. "Explain how cutting school lunch programs helps kids learn. Explain how denying health care helps families stay healthy. Explain how any of your policies actually help the people you claim to serve, instead of hiding behind doublespeak and calling their suffering anecdotal." The room had become a powder keg. Two men, face to face across the desk, voices booming in a space that had transformed from entertainment venue into battlefield. The audience sat frozen, knowing they were witnessing something that would be replayed and dissected for years. Vance's face was crimson, his fury unrestrained. "You want an explanation, Stephen? Here it is. Sometimes leadership means making unpopular choices. Choices people like you will never understand because you've never carried real responsibility. You think governing is just throwing money at every problem without caring about the consequences." Colbert's voice thundered back, matching him decibel for decibel. "Real responsibility? Real responsibility is being honest with the people who elected you. Real responsibility is acknowledging when your policies hurt them, instead of dismissing their lives as hardship cases." "Never dismissed anyone's pain," Vance roared, jabbing a finger at Colbert like a weapon. "I said we have to look at the bigger picture, and if you weren't so busy trying to make me look bad, you'd understand the difference." "The bigger picture?" Colbert's voice cracked with raw outrage. "The bigger picture is every struggling American, not just the ones who can afford to bankroll your campaigns. The bigger picture is the teacher buying supplies with her own money, the veteran waiting months for benefits, not the corporations lining their pockets with your tax cuts." Vance leaned across the desk now, finger still aimed like a dagger. "You don't know what you're talking about. You sit here night after night, making jokes while people like me actually fix this country. You contribute nothing but criticism. And cheap shots." Colbert's eyes blazed as he snapped back, voice like steel. "Cheap shots? No, Mr. Vice President. This is accountability." Colbert's voice cracked with genuine emotion. "Asking you to explain your policies isn't a cheap shot. Holding you accountable for your record isn't a cheap shot. What's cheap is coming on this show and treating struggling Americans like they're inconvenient statistics in your political calculations." The confrontation had crossed every line of television decorum, but it was about to get worse. Vance, clouded by anger and cornered by his own missteps, made the mistake that would end the interview, and possibly his career. "You know what, Stephen? Maybe if you spent less time worrying about other people's problems and more time dealing with your own issues, you'd understand why real leaders have to make tough choices." The studio went silent. Not just quiet, funeral quiet. Even in the heat of their shouting match, everyone present knew instantly that Vance had crossed into forbidden territory. Colbert's personal struggles, his family tragedies, his long public journey through grief and healing, were well known. To weaponize them in a political argument was beyond disgraceful. Colbert's voice, when it finally returned, was deadly quiet. "My issues. My personal issues. You're going to stand there and use my family's tragedy as a political talking point." Vance realized immediately what he had done, but it was already too late. The damage was catastrophic and irreversible. "Stephen, I didn't mean—" "No." Colbert cut him off, his voice shaking with grief and rage. "You meant exactly what you said. You thought you could hurt me by dragging out the worst moment of my life because you couldn't defend your policies. You thought you could silence me by exploiting my pain." "I wasn't trying to," Vance began desperately. "Get out," Colbert said quietly, but his words carried across the studio with the weight of a gavel strike. "Get out of my studio." Vance froze, blinking, as if waiting for someone to break the tension with a joke. No one moved. "Stephen, let's just—" "I said get out," Colbert repeated, louder now, his voice steadying. "You want to attack my family? You want to use my father's death as a political weapon? Then you can leave. Right now." The audience sat in paralyzed silence, hearing only the sound of Colbert's heavy breathing. Vance looked around for support, searching the faces of the crew, the crowd, anyone who might intervene. "Nothing. You can't just kick me off the show," Vance finally said, his voice breaking into a weak protest. "I'm the Vice President of the United States. And I'm the host of this show," Colbert replied with ice-cold finality. "Security. Please escort. The Vice President out." 2 security guards appeared almost instantly, their movements sharp, professional, and deliberate. "This is ridiculous," Vance snapped as they approached. "You can't treat a sitting Vice President this way, over a political disagreement." "This stopped being about politics," Colbert replied, his voice steady but tinged with pain. "The moment you decided to attack my family, you crossed a line no decent person crosses, and now you face the consequences." The guards, visibly uneasy at the unprecedented task before them, took Vance gently but firmly by the arms. He resisted only for a moment, then realized his protests only deepened the humiliation. "The American people will hear about this," Vance called out as he was led away. "They'll know what kind of person you really are." Colbert, still standing behind his desk, his face a mask of fury and sorrow, didn't flinch. "They already know what kind of person I am." he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. "The question is whether they'll figure out what kind of person you are." The studio doors shut behind the vice president and his escort, leaving a silence so profound it seemed to vibrate in the air. Colbert stood motionless for several seconds, staring at the space Vance had occupied, before finally sinking heavily back into his chair. He looked directly into the camera. "Well," he said with a weary half-smile that never reached his eyes, "that's something that's never happened before on The Late Show." The extraordinary confrontation was over, but the consequences had only just begun. What started as a routine political interview had become a defining moment, one that would be analyzed, debated, and remembered long after both men left the public stage. So, there you have it, the complete breakdown of how a sitting vice president ended up being escorted off one of America's most popular late-night television shows. The clash between Stephen Colbert and J.D. Vance shows what happens when political spin collides with journalistic accountability, and when personal attacks cross lines that should never be crossed. What do you think about Vance's decision to bring up Colbert's personal tragedy? Was Colbert right to have him removed from the studio? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more breakdowns of the moments that define our political landscape.